Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are doing a retrospective of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Infinity Saga. Now I know that I just did an episode with Crazy Joe of the Mega Podtastic YouTube channel and podcast ranking the Infinity Saga, but I saved a lot of the retrospective stuff for this because I feel that it would have gotten lost in the rankings. The rankings deal with all 23 movies individually. This will deal with the Infinity Saga as a whole. We will look at the most important names in the creative team for those movies while also breaking down what each of the phases were for the overall Infinity Saga. Then we will look at the official timeline of the Infinity Saga that was released by Marvel Studios. I will then talk about the impact that this franchise had on Hollywood and the movie business, both good and bad, and then ending it off with some post-Infinity Saga predictions and feeling towards the Phase 4 slate. If you want the PDF of this presentation file, then head over to the blog, MetrObeliskRadio.blogspot.com, and find the corresponding write-up to the episode, and there you will find a PDF download link. So without any further delay, let's get right into the Infinity Saga's retrospective. So starting off with the creative team, I feel that the success of the MCU really comes down to three people: Jon Favreau, Joss Whedon, and James Gunn. So let's start off with Jon Favreau. Jon Favreau was an actor that most people may know from movies such as Very Bad Things, Swingers, and Made. He was also in 2003's Daredevil. He was Matt Murdock's other lawyer that was working in his office. He also directed the first two Iron Man movies. Now, the reason why I say that the MCU fans need to credit him for the success of the MCU is because he was willing to run the risk with Iron Man, and a lot of what's in the MCU today that isn't humor has its roots in the very first Iron Man movie. Now let's jump over to Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon was more of a TV guy with shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Firefly, and Dollhouse. Him working on shows like Firefly, more of your character ensembles, prepared him to handle the Avengers, which was a character ensemble. Most people give the Russo brothers credit for quote-unquote cleaning up Joss Whedon's mess after Avengers Age of Ultron. I will say this: I feel that the mess was caused by Kevin Feige by being overbearing on production of Avengers Age of Ultron. This is why we never saw Joss Whedon do anything else for the MCU, and he jumped ship to go work on the DCEU's Justice League. A perfect example of this is the farmhouse sequence in Avengers Age of Ultron. Kevin Feige originally wanted that cut out of the movie, but Joss Whedon kept persisting on keeping it in, knowing that it was a sequence that focused on character building that would have helped the MCU long term. So final on my list of three is James Gunn. Now, James Gunn has the most interesting history. He went from writing the live-action Scooby-Doo movies to directing the movies Slither and Super before he would go on to do Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I originally said that he jumped ship from the MCU to go do the DCEU's The Suicide Squad, and that's largely because he was let go from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and then brought back because of fan backlash. I will say this, you reap what you sow, and he was fired over controversial tweets that he made over a decade ago. And let me bring it back to you reap what you sow. He was in full support of Roseanne Barr being fired from her sitcom, so after that, I really had no sympathy for him losing his gig on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And finally, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, Kevin Feige. Now, he has a long history of working on Marvel movies as a producer. He started as an associate producer on the first X-Men movie from Fox and went on to be in production for the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the 2003 Daredevil movie, Elektra, and both Fantastic Four movies from Fox before going and doing Iron Man. The rest, as they say, is history. Now, keep in mind that he's only a producer, meaning that he has to hire the people to make the ideas come to fruition. I feel that all he did after the success of the Avengers was bring in indie filmmakers because they were easier for him to control, and television directors, ergo the Russo brothers. Filmmakers like Joss Whedon, Jon Favreau, James Gunn, Kenneth Branagh, who directed Thor, and Shane Black, who did Iron Man 3, would never return. A perfect example with this is when he fired Edgar Wright from Ant-Man, even though Edgar Wright had tried to get that movie made since 2006. From Feige's perspective, who's easier to control, Edgar Wright or Peyton Reed? Now, most of you may be asking, who's Peyton Reed? Exactly. Who is Peyton Reed? This presents the problems with the Infinity Saga after the release of the Avengers, is Kevin Feige believed that he was the brainchild of all the movies from Iron Man up, and it was no one else. So now with my rant on Kevin Feige done and over with, now let's move on to the overall look at all three phases of the Infinity Saga and what they all genuinely meant in a nutshell. So let's start off with Phase 1. That is from the first Iron Man movie up to the Avengers. Now I feel that this was the most creative of the phases of the Infinity Saga. Iron Man was a genuine risk, same with the Avengers. Who knew that this would take off the way it did? Now, you could say that this is the only phase where you can watch all the movies back to back and get a different experience each time. This is also where the main heroes of the Infinity Saga get their introductions with Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, Thor, Nick Fury, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. And in Phase 2, that's from Iron Man 3 up through Ant-Man. Now, this was the phase with the most amount of sequels outside of the introductions of the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. And in my opinion, this is where the MCU plateaued. All of the movies had to have humor, even if it wouldn't fit, because the Avengers had it and everyone liked it. And this became especially prevalent after the Guardians of the Galaxy. But I'll get to that in a moment. Now, this phase, as a result, was the most bland in terms of world building, since the only things mentioned after this was Sokovia from Age of Ultron and Bucky Barnes' Winter Soldier. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy was the exception in this phase, but not the rule. Something I brought up in the ranking episode is Thor the Dark World was the first movie to be centered around the Infinity Stones. Before this, in Phase 1, it was just, hey, let's build up to the Avengers, and Iron Man 3 was basically the epilogue. Yes, the Infinity Saga storyline was late in this phase, but I still stand by my statements that this phase was the most bland because of too many sequels and not enough new introductions. So finally, now we've hit Phase 3, that's Captain America Civil War up through Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, in my opinion, this is the most bloated phase in the Infinity Saga. This was a combination of sequels like Captain America Civil War and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with the introduction movies such as Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, in just this one phase alone, there are 11 movies. That's almost half the Infinity Saga in just one phase that lasted 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. Now, Captain America Civil War is where the Infinity Saga really shit the bed for me. All it really did at the end of the day was set up two movies, Spider-Man Homecoming and Black Panther. Apparently, this movie split the Avengers into two different factions when no future movies even reference that, except for the very beginning of Avengers Infinity War. And the Avengers on both sides mended fences very quickly in Infinity War, rendering Civil War as a complete waste of time. It wasn't mentioned in Black Panther. It wasn't mentioned in Spider-Man Homecoming, even though Peter Parker was at the airport fight and his vlogs from Civil War are shown, and Tony Stark was his mentor. The Civil War references in Spider-Man Homecoming are so brief that it's easy to miss. The only time that Civil War is really brought up in the movies is in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and that movie came out after Avengers Infinity War. So now I want to look at one final question in terms of the overall MCU. And that final thing is, did Spider-Man really even need to be in the MCU? And the answer is no. No, he didn't. Now, for those who don't know, Marvel Studios worked with Sony to co-produce two Spider-Man movies for the Infinity Saga and for Spider-Man to have appearances in Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. The problem with Spider-Man in the MCU is he's not Spider-Man, he's Iron Boy, Iron Man's trusty sidekick. It was a complete waste for Spider-Man, and the MCU was already successful without him. He was also a pointless character in the MCU. You could have cut him out of Infinity War and Endgame and nothing really would have changed. So his MCU movies are really inconsequential to the overall Infinity Saga if you think about it. I will say this, my anticipation for the Morbius movie, a Sony production, is higher than John Watts' Spider-Man 3. Alright, with the discussion of the three phases of the MCU Infinity Saga out of the way, let's move into the official timeline that was released by Marvel Studios. Now, just a little bit of history. After Spider-Man Homecoming came out, Marvel Studios had to release an official timeline for the Infinity Saga because of a quote-unquote mistake that was made. In Spider-Man Homecoming, we see Michael Keaton's Vulture recovering the alien tech after the Battle of New York in the Avengers, and then it cuts to a title card 8 years later. Now, up to this point, up to Spider-Man Homecoming, it was assumed that the Infinity Saga movies took place in the year they were released. Example, Iron Man was released in 2008, it takes place in 2008. Now, with me looking at the official timeline of the Infinity Saga, I am only going to look at the main movies and the years that they took place in. If I try to go over every single event that every movie cuts back to and cuts forward to, we would be here for the next hour and a half, and quite frankly, I don't want to talk about a timeline for that long. So for all you MCU fanboys that slam the Fox X-Men movies for the timeline is too convoluted, go read up on the official timeline of the Infinity Saga and try to make any fucking sense of it. I dare ya. So now moving on to the official timeline of the Infinity Saga. So from 1943 to 1945, that was Captain America First Avenger. Makes sense, it's a World War II movie. 1995 was Captain Marvel, obviously. Then here's where it starts to get a little off the rails. So Iron Man that released in 2008, well, Iron Man takes place in 2010. And then in 2011 is Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor all take place in the same year. 2012 is The Avengers and Iron Man 3 all take place in the same year. 2013 was Thor The Dark World, so okay, we have an official timeline along with release schedules lining up. 2014, Captain America The Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 all take place in the same year. 2015, Avengers Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. 2016, Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming. 2016 going into 2017 is Doctor Strange. 2017 is Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, Avengers Infinity War, and then cut to 5 years later, so 2022, Avengers Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home. So now let's get to the impact of the Infinity Saga, and I always like to start off with the positives. So one of the big positives is this series did push the comic book movie genre forward by showing how interconnectivity can hold as long as you have the right team behind the entirety of the project. And it did make cinematic universes viable again, since the last big one was Universal's with their monster movie starting with Dracula back in 1931. So in this regard, Marvel really did nothing new. And it also made C, D, and even Z-list characters popular, like Iron Man was a C or D-list character, Rocket Raccoon was a no-list character, Black Widow was kind of there, Thor was more of a D-list character, Black Panther, same thing, was more of a D-list character, and Doctor Strange was also in the D and F-list type characters, but all of them became popular after this. So what this series proved is that all you need is brand recognition and goodwill that you're building to something bigger in order for your franchise to succeed. Now let's move on to the negative impact that the MCU Infinity Saga had on the movie business as a whole. Now this series started strong with building to the Avengers, and then it became an IOU series up until Avengers Endgame. All this proved was producers can promise that the universe will fall into the Eisner's lap someday, and we will see this being replicated with Universal with their Dark Universe, Sony with their Vertigo Comics universe that they just started with Bloodshot, Warner Brothers with their DCEU, so on and so forth. But no other studio has seen the success of Marvel, because I think the audience is wisening up to the tactic of promising that it'll come together, quote unquote, someday. When will it come together? Not even the studios or producers know, but it'll come. It'll all make sense at some point down the line. We pinky promise. Now, this series has perpetuated what is arguably the biggest problem with Hollywood right now, in that this series was all producer-driven. That's all these big movies have become, is just what producers want instead of what directors and audiences want. Every movie is made on an assembly line, so as a result, all of the movies after the Avengers just felt like they were good enough. Because the MCU fanboys give Kevin Feige a pass for so long, there was no incentive for him to improve upon these movies. What competition could they, and also let's look at this. What competition did Kevin Feige really have during the peak of the MCU? DC kept shitting the bed after Batman v Superman, and Universal really shit the bed with the Dark Universe because of The Mummy. So in one aspect, I can blame the MCU fanboys all day long for not pushing Feige at his best, but I also can't blame Feige if he was the best game in town at the time. So let's get back into that. I actually say that the Avengers was the best and worst thing to happen to the MCU. Because after the Avengers, every MCU movie needed to have humor because it was in the Avengers and everybody liked it. Therefore, we are going to put in every movie, even if it's uncalled for or it breaks tension, because punchline. And this is really prevalent in Doctor Strange and damn near ruined that movie. And this was especially true after Guardians of the Galaxy. And now this series, I'll make one last point. This series has really ruined the art of the blockbuster. It used to be that you just made one good movie and you get a sequel or two to wrap it all up. Now you have to make an incomplete movie and tease that there's more to come later on. Stuff that normally would have been in one movie is now spread out over 2 or 3. A perfect example of this is the 2017 movie Power Rangers. Back in the old days, what the entirety of 2017 Power Rangers would just be the first third of the movie, maybe up to the 40-minute mark. Then about the halfway point, they would show the Power Rangers team struggle and break up just to get back together again at the end and beat the bad guy and remain together forever. Now, this is a rather simple story that was rather common throughout the 80s and 90s. Now, this would be spread out over 2 movies and a number of spin-offs that will lead to a crossover, rinse and repeat for the next 10 to 15 years. Movies are not comic books. They have to end at some point, and if the story is being stretched, it will show early on. It will show from that very first installment. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff for this episode, and that is the post-Infinity Saga predictions. Now let me get this out of the way. I've already predicted that the MCU was going to go on a natural decline after Endgame, because Endgame, to the casual audiences, was the definitive ending to this series. There is no doubt about that. Now, this is being recorded after the COVID-19 pandemic has broke out. So Black Widow has been pushed back from May 2020 to November 2020, and other MCU movies have gotten pushed back as a result, like The Eternals, Shang-Chi, etc. And even the Disney Plus show Falcon and Winter Soldier had to go back and do reshoots. Now, Phase 4 of the MCU was going to be split between theatrical movies and Disney Plus shows. As of now, the fanbase just got fractured in a place where it wasn't fractured before. The movies and the TV shows, so that would be Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Daredevil, etc., could coexist as 2 different things, even though they were all under the Marvel umbrella, because whereas the TV shows would reference the movies wouldn't reference the TV shows. So now, fans of the movies might not watch the TV shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, Agent Carter, so on and so forth, like I just stated before. It's even questionable whether or not the shows not on Disney Plus were even canonical to begin with. Kevin Feige and Ike Perlmutter, who was the head of Marvel Television, really left that question unanswered for a very long time until Feige came out and announced that the Disney Plus shows were canonical. Now, if you want to follow along with the MCU, it's not enough to just watch the movies. You now have to watch the Disney Plus shows. My prediction, this is going to go over like a fart in church. I feel that the Disney Plus shows will just accelerate the decline of the MCU as a whole, because now it's too much work for the casual fans to quote-unquote keep up with the Joneses, to follow along with what the hell is now going on. So as a result of COVID-19, a lot of these Disney Plus shows had to get pushed back. Some are complete and just waiting to be released, like WandaVision is right now. Others are in various stages of production. Now, I believe that Falcon and Winter Soldier, along with WandaVision, are still going to be released with no problems. Those shows are way too far along to get shit canned now. Loki is currently filming, and What If Season 1 is still in production. The shows that are still ordered, quote-unquote ordered, are Hawkeye, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, and She-Hulk. Now, with Disney's current financial situation, some of these shows like Hawkeye, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, and She-Hulk may get quietly canceled, because those would be the easiest to quietly remove from the slate and have no one really say anything. I have no doubt that Falcon and Winter Soldier, WandaVision, and Loki will get released because those projects are way too big. What If might get pushed back, but still see a release of at least the first season. There were 2 seasons in various stages of production. Now, why am I talking about the Disney Plus shows? Like I said, let's bring it back to, according to Kevin Feige, the story is going to be spread out over the movies and the streaming shows. If it's not economically viable for Disney to resume production on these Marvel shows, or even some of the movies, they will cut them before Disney goes tits up. So Phase 4 of the MCU, post-Infinity Saga, to me is looking very shaky right now. So let's continue this quote-unquote predictions train with, what I think of the Phase 4 slate. So let's separate this into two. The movies and the Disney Plus shows. Let's start with the movies. So the first movie on the slate, Black Widow. I really don't care about this movie. I feel that Marvel should have made it back around 2015, 2016, right when Black Widow was at the peak of her popularity. But now we all know the end of Black Widow's story as a result of Endgame. Apparently this movie follows the events of Civil War, so it is a retroactive addition to the Infinity Saga, probably made to fix up some of the boo-boos that were in the Infinity Saga, but still, how many of you guys genuinely care about Black Widow? The next movie on the slate is The Eternals. Personally, I don't care. I don't know anything about them. Shang-Chi, I really don't care, and I'm already calling this out. This movie was made solely for the Chinese market. John Watts' Spider-Man 3. I didn't like Spider-Man Homecoming or Spider-Man Far From Home if you watched that ranking, so I really don't give a shit how that ends. Now, the one movie I am curious about is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, here's where I'm terrified for this. I was terrified for this because Scott Derrickson has been let go. And I'm scared for this because the title alone sounds Lovecraftian. So how much into the horrors of the multiverse is Disney and Marvel willing to go? So I will probably wait for home video for this one, and I'll probably still watch it. Now, it is important that after I wrote this, I heard that the news that Sam Raimi took over directing duties from Scott Derrickson, but I'm still concerned for the same reasons, is how far into the horror realm is Marvel and Disney willing to go with a Lovecraftian title like Multiverse of Madness? Now, this decision is completely out of Sam Raimi's hands and in the hands of Kevin Feige. In my opinion, you don't replace one director known for horror and replace him with the guy who has brought us the Evil Dead series if you didn't want to go down the route of horror. Now, the final movie in the slate is Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm sorry, I really have no interest in seeing Jane Foster's Thor. So now, what do I think of the Disney Plus shows? This one, I am going to split this up into two more categories. I'm going to talk about the shows that are currently in production or filming or have been finished, and then move into the shows that are not in production that are only ordered. So starting with shows in production, filming / finished, Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'll probably check this out. It does sound interesting to me. Now, this is currently in reshoots because apparently one of the plot lines is too close to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're seeing right now. Now, this isn't unheard of. If you remember, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was delayed after 9/11 happened to go back and reshoot the scenes that had the Twin Towers in the background. Also, the theatrical poster was completely redesigned to remove the Twin Towers. So the next show is WandaVision. No thanks. I like Paul Bettany's vision, but I think that the love story subplot between these two characters wasn't really well handled in the movies, and it really felt forced a lot of times. Loki is a maybe for me, since this is set in an alternate timeline when Loki secured the Tesseract in Avengers Endgame. Now, this show is currently filming, and based on how far into filming they are, there's a very high chance that we will see this show come, even if it gets delayed. I'll wait for reviews on this one. And finally, we need to talk about What If. Now, this show can be interesting. For those who don't know what If is, it was a series of comic stories that were one issue long, and they could deal with more mature themes like death because the Comics Code Authority wouldn't let Marvel kill any of their characters off back in the day or deal with mature themes. And I will be blasting some images of what the What If comics were back in the day on your screen if you're watching this. So this one, I'm going to play it by ear whether or not I'll watch it. Now, this could be Marvel's version of The Twilight Zone or Outer Worlds or Amazing Stories in the sense that it's a new story every week. So it could be interesting. This is currently in production. Season 2 is in pre-production. So we may see a delay on this, but we also might get this one released. And finally, we are going to go into the shows that are currently ordered, starting off with Hawkeye. I've got no interest in this show. I was never really a Hawkeye fan. With that out of the way, let's move on to the next show on the slate, which is Ms. Marvel. Now, with Ms. Marvel, I really don't know, because I do like the character, but I fear that it's going to take a sharp left turn. Now, if I had to put money down on which Ms. Marvel that Marvel Studios would use, it's going to be Kamala Khan's Ms. Marvel, just based on the fact that she is the most recent. Also, Kamala Khan was used as Ms. Marvel in the video game LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. because you can't use Carol Danvers because Carol Danvers in the MCU is Captain Marvel. So to end this off, I'm just going to wait for reviews on Miss Marvel. Now, the third show on this slate, Moon Knight. Now, I do like the character, but I do fear that Disney and Marvel is going to homogenize the character to death. Moon Knight was a very violent version of Batman, for those who don't know. Now, with Disney and Marvel being super safe with everything post the Avengers, no thanks. I fear that they are just going to make Moon Knight look like a ripoff of Batman, even though he is vastly different than Batman. And the final show on this slate is She-Hulk. I never really liked She-Hulk, so it was something I was going to skip irregardless of the reviews. She-Hulk simply never interested me, even when I was reading comics back in the early 2000s. So I want to end this retrospective off with the questions of, what do you guys think of all this? Is anyone still interested after the definitive ending to the Infinity Saga that was Endgame? What Marvel needs to know and is going to learn within the next couple of years is the movie audience is not the comic book audience. At some point, a series has to come to an end. Because as the old saying goes, nothing lasts forever.